Hello, very warm welcome. And to anyone who's new to this channel, thanks for dropping by. So, this is going to be a little brief talk on the teachings of Christ as shared by Bruno Gröning. Bruno Gröning was a very simple, humble man who, in Germany after the Second World War, did some teaching and did a lot of healing, a lot of unspeakably amazing healings happened around him. And he gave all the credit to God and said that what he was teaching was just the teachings of Christ. So, to my knowledge, Bruno Gröning didn't use the word surrender a lot, and yet in many ways it's really the essence of what he taught. So I'd like to read a quote of his. People shouldn't lose heart nor complain about their illness, but rather should simply surrender themselves to the divine. So right there, you can see that maybe he didn't use the word surrender a lot, but it's really the essence of what Bruno Gröning taught. Bruno Gröning taught about being connected to God, being guided by God, following God. He said, if you want to succeed, follow God. Meaning, if we want to have a happy, healthy life, then what we need to do is to follow God. And he went even further than that and said, a human being must be under divine guidance. There is no life without it. Wow. It's a very strong statement that if we're not being guided by God, that we're not actually living. And we can all verify this in our own experience. I know I have. When I feel connected to the divine and I feel like I'm really listening and just kind of being guided, things just kind of flow and I feel good. But even when I'm not, even if more exciting things are happening, there's kind of a flatness or a deadness to life. So I believe that's what Bruno Gröning meant. Here's some more quotes on this very interesting topic. Bruno said, in talking about Christ, Bruno said, oh, pardon me, I thought I had it ready. He said, this is talking about how people really don't understand who Christ was or what's possible with Christ. And Bruno said, and they also don't believe that he, meaning Christ, can dwell in us, that we can actually be guided by him. That is, that God, through his Son, leads us to where we belong. To where we belong, to whom we belong. So Bruno said that we belong to God and that Christ was God's Son. He never claimed, he actually clarified, a very interesting theological topic was that he said, yes, that Jesus was the Son of God and God has more than one Son. So this is one place that he disagrees with the Christian religion. But what he said is that God, through Christ, literally can guide us if we're willing to be led, if we're willing to follow. Now here's another quote of his that talks about this idea of surrender and being led. He said this to Sister Maria, a Catholic nun. He said, Sister Maria, you have to do more. Always imagine Christ to be with you, working within you and through you. Not you, not the person. This you have to put aside. I have to do this also. So very interestingly enough, there's this sense in which we need to be willing to surrender our, what Bruno calls little self. You could also maybe say personality. And then to be guided by God. Bruno, when talking about a very wonderful spirit experience in his life, he said, and for my human self, this was the most wonderful experience. And then when talking about a very painful experience, he said, and for my human self, this was very difficult. And I'm paraphrasing here, but that's That's the kind of languaging that Bruno would use. Putting our personality aside or our human self aside. And so this video is in response to a comment. Someone watched one of my videos and said, "What you said is surrender, isn't it? Empty me and let God enter the empty space." I would say that's close, but not quite what Bruno Grinning taught. Bruno did tell us to empty ourselves of our negative habits and to empty ourselves of evil, but to my knowledge, he never said to empty us of sort of our personality, or as he called it, our human self or our little self. Not to get rid of it, but to kind of move it so that it's not in the driver's seat. That's my understanding on this topic. So, many people think of Bruno Grinning and they think what they've heard is trust and have faith, or nothing is impossible, nothing is incurable. But I personally don't believe that's really the central focus of his teaching. I believe this topic of being connected to God and then being guided by God and being willing to follow and being willing to be led, to take our personality, our personal self, and put it aside. And just as it's written, it's written that Jesus prayed, in essence, hey, this is what I want, and not my will, but thy will be done. I think that's really the essence of surrender. And even in that case, Jesus didn't sort of empty himself out. He asked for what he wanted, and then he surrendered. And I believe that's really very much in alignment with what Bruno taught. And yeah, thank you so much for joining in. Love this topic because, as I said, I feel this is really the central point that Bruno Grinning, everything else. Well, he himself said to be connected to God, that is everything. And I'll read one more quote of his. Bruno said, "Human being needs to be connected to God. God wanted no more. This is the true divine teaching." So the thing is to be connected to God and to make that our first priority, we do need to put our personality second. So as it's written, Christ wrote, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God," and putting other things second. Thank you so much. Take care. Much love. Well, there's one more thing. I keep thinking I'm done. This topic is just very near and dear to my heart. There's a prayer that I love that I really think sums this up. And it goes something like this. It's called the third step prayer. God, I offer myself to thee to build with me and do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self. And in this context, self means selfishness. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy love, thy power, thy wisdom, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. Because Bruno spoke about being an instrument of God, a servant of God. Meaning God's in charge. We're the employee. God's the boss. Bruno Grinning called himself a nurse, saying that God was the doctor. The nurse just follows the doctor's order and cares for the patients, but in terms of the healing, just follows the doctor's orders. And I think that's the attitude he called us all to strive for.